Jack Callahan's quiet, predictable life ends the night. A fiery object crashes into his Montana ranch and brings an alien warrior begging for help. With hunters closing in and bullets flying, Jack must choose: stay out of the fight or risk everything to save someone who isn't even human. Just a quick reminder before we get started. Only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much. Now we start the amazing story.
Jack Callahan had never been one for surprises. Not since the Corps. Not since the war. He liked things simple. Wake up before dawn, check the fence line, work on the truck, drink until the memories faded into background noise. That was life now. Quiet, predictable. Then the sky split open. Jack was on his porch when it happened, leaning against the railing with a cigarette in one hand and a beer in the other. The Montana night was dark and still, until it wasn't. A fireball tore across the sky, trailing black smoke, something metal and wrong spinning toward the tree line behind his ranch. A few seconds later, two smaller shapes followed, searchlights sweeping the ground. Not crashing. Hunting. Jack exhaled smoke, watching the streaks of fire vanish beyond the ridge. Didn't concern him. Then he heard the impact. A distant, muffled whump that he felt in his ribs. A few seconds later, the circling craft banked low, sweeping across the horizon like vultures. Jack sighed and crushed his cigarette against the porch railing. Shit. He grabbed the shotgun from inside and started walking. The wreckage was still burning when Jack reached it. Something had come down hard, leaving a long gouge in the dirt. Pieces of jagged metal scattered through the trees. Smoke drifted through. The night air, thick with the smell of scorched metal and something acrid he couldn't place. And then he saw her. She was humanoid, but not human. Tall. Lean. Skin just a shade too pale under the blood and grime. Her hair was dark and matted, with sweat pulled back in a tight braid. Her ears were too pointy to be human. Her eyes shone yellow in the night. Yellow. Her uniform, if that's what it was torn and burned, clinging to a body built like a soldier. She staggered forward, one arm wrapped around her ribs. Jack took half a step back, keeping the shotgun loose in his grip. The woman's head snapped up. She froze. For a second, they just stared at each other. Then she spoke. It was fast, urgent, her voice hoarse with pain. Not English. Hell, not even close to English. Not close to Pashto or Dari. Either. The sounds were sharp, clipped. Jack didn't understand a damn word of it, but he recognized the tone. Someone asking for help. Jack didn't move. Lady, I don't know what you're saying. She took a shaky step forward, hand still pressed to her ribs. Then she flinched, head snapping toward the sky. Jack heard it too, the whine of engines. The hunters were coming. Jack shifted his grip on the shotgun. Guess you're not alone, huh? The woman said something else, urgent, eyes locked onto him. He didn't know what the words meant, but the look in them was clear. Help me. Jack exhaled slowly. The engines were getting closer. He glanced at her wound. She was bleeding bad. Didn't concern him. Except it did. Jack swore under his breath. Come on, he muttered, nodding toward the trees. Move. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the order. She followed. The two ships landed in the clearing a minute later. Jack watched from the tree line. Shotgun, braced against his shoulder. He could feel the woman behind him, breath shallow but steady. She wasn't panicking. Good. The ships were small, one-man craft built for speed. They hissed as they settled, steam venting from their underbellies. A moment later, the cockpit slid open and two figures stepped out. They weren't human either. Stocky, broad-shouldered, their armor segmented and sleek. It shimmered with a faint haze. Some sort of shielding, maybe? Jack didn't move. He just watched. One of them scanned the wreckage, then turned toward the trees. He barked something in the same sharp language the woman had used. Then he pulled, a weapon from his hip. Jack exhaled. All right, he muttered. Your move. The alien took a step forward, then another. He raised his weapon. Jack pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared. The first hunter staggered back as buckshot shredded through his armor, punching through the energy field like it wasn't even there. The second barely had time to react before Jack pumped another round into him. The soft armor wasn't built for this. It might have stopped a plasma bolt, but it wasn't worth shit against lead. The first hunter hit the ground, unmoving. The second twitched, a wet, gasping noise coming from under his helmet. Jack ejected the spent shells and chambered 2 more. Behind him, the woman was staring. Jack tilted his head toward the wreckage. "That was your ride?" She hesitated, then nodded. Jack sighed. "Figures." The second alien let out a final, rattling breath and went still. The woman stepped closer, staring down at the bodies. Her gaze flicked to Jack. He could see the question in her eyes. "You killed them?" Jack shrugged. "Yeah." She looked at the bodies again. Then slowly she nodded, a facsimile of a smile appearing. The smile freaked him out. Jack had seen a lot of shit in his time. What if she was some kind of psychopath, a serial killer, and he'd just gunned down the equivalent of space cops? Were there galactic cops? Jack sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. "Not my problem. Too late for that." "Follow me," he muttered. He had a feeling this was the beginning of the end of the quiet, miserable limbo he'd been living in. The alien, space alien, didn't hesitate. She fell into step behind him, keeping a wary distance. Jack kept half an eye on her as they trudged through the dry grass, boots crunching against the dirt. She was still hurting. Obviously. Nobody crash-landed a spaceship and walked away without a scratch. He snorted at the previously unimaginable thought. Jack slung the shotgun over his back and kept moving. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant smoke. The walk was quiet, aside from the occasional rustle of wind and the woman's uneven breathing. She clutched her side, fingers pressing against her abdomen. Jack frowned. How much could aliens bleed? Too much, from the looks of it. He didn't have his first aid kit on him. It was back at the ranch. Jack had sworn off getting involved. He'd buried that part of himself deep, left it behind in the dust and blood of a war he didn't care to remember. But here he was, dragging an injured alien woman back to his house, shotgun slung over his shoulder, probably about to make some stupid decisions. Again, the first being shooting the maybe space cops. Inside the ranch, Jack flicked on the lights. The place was not much of a mess. A few half-empty beer bottles on the counter and a stack of unopened mail by the door. He grabbed the first aid kit from the shelf, then turned to her. "All right," he muttered, nodding at her wound. "Let's get that patched up." She tensed as he approached, watching him with those sharp yellow eyes. Jack sighed. Through a long, frustrating process of pointing and nodding, he managed to get her to remove her torn shirt so he could get to the wound. It wasn't as bad as he'd feared, but it wasn't good either. Deep, ragged gash, ugly bruising beneath. The blood smeared across her skin was dark red. She flinched as he poured saline over the wound. Her hands curled into fists, but she didn't make a sound. Tough. He wrapped a bandage around her ribs as best he could, ignoring the way her gaze drilled into him like she was trying to figure him out. Jack scowled. "What?" he grumbled. She didn't answer, just kept staring, looking surprised. Did they have high-tech sci-fi bullshit that made basic bandages obsolete? Probably. Didn't matter. This was what he had, and it wasn't enough. Jack exhaled sharply and reached for his phone. It was late, but maybe Nosebleed was still up. He hit speed dial. A few rings, then a groggy voice answered. "Jack? What the hell, man? It's..." A pause. A sigh. "What do you need?" Jack kept his eyes on the alien. On her. "Need a favor," he said. "Got someone here with a wound. Can't take him to a hospital." Silence. Then, "Jesus." "Jack." Nosebleed's voice had shifted. "What the hell did you do?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, smirking. "Nothing yet." Another pause. Then a resigned sigh. "You at the ranch?" "Yeah." "Give me 20. Jack ended the call and shoved his phone back in his pocket. When he looked up, the alien was watching him again, head slightly tilted. Jack exhaled, pointing at her, then miming wrapping a bandage. "Help," he said, then pointed toward the door. "More help. Soon." Her eyes flicked from his hands to his face. A long pause, then the smallest hesitant nod. Jack sat back against the counter, rubbing his temple. His fingers twitched toward the cigarette pack in his coat. He stopped himself. Too sober for this? She shifted slightly, adjusting the bandage. Then she raised. a hand and tapped her chest. "Tara!" Jack frowned. "Tara?" She nodded once. "Well, that was something." He tapped his own chest. "Jack." She hesitated before repeating, "Jock?" Jack huffed a quiet breath. "Close enough." The silence stretched thick between them. Before either of them could speak, the low rumble of an engine cut through the night. Nosebleed was here. Ethan Sanchez was a scruffy 5'9" ex-Navy corpsman with short, unkempt brown hair and permanent dark circles under his eyes. He climbed out of his old truck with a med bag that looked big enough to contain a damn hospital. Jack met him at the door. Ethan eyed him suspiciously. "Okay, what?" He froze, stared past Jack. "Holy shit." Tara sat in Jack's old armchair, watching the newcomer with wary eyes. Ethan turned back to Jack, voice flat. "When did you get a girlfriend?" Jack rolled his eyes. "Not a girlfriend." Ethan peered past him again. "Wait, the ears? What the hell? Elf? Vulcan?" Jack sighed. "Shut up and patch her up first." Ethan grumbled but moved closer, hands raised in a show of peace. "She speak English?" Jack snorted. "Why the hell would she?" Ethan shot him a look that screamed, "Is this my life now?" Then crouched beside Tara. She flinched slightly, still tense. "Relax, lady." He tried his best calm voice with hands up. "I'm the best shot you got." She didn't understand the words, but she seemed to get the intent. Ethan carefully unwrapped the bandages and immediately went still. Jesus. Jack's stomach tightened. "What?" Ethan tilted the cloth just enough to expose the wound. The blood wasn't red. It was blue. Ethan looked up, expression unreadable. Then, with a slow shake of his head, he muttered his signature phrase. "What the hell did you do, Jack?" Jack exhaled, rubbing his temple. "I didn't do shit. It was red before. I just gave her saline." Ethan muttered darkly under his breath. Jesus. Could she be allergic to saline? But allergies don't change. Blood color? Jack frowned. "Why the hell would I know that?" Ethan shot him an unimpressed look. "Do I look like a xenobiologist?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "A what now?" Ethan sighed. "Xenobiologist. Someone who studies alien biology. Which, surprise, isn't me." He pointed at the kitchen. "Get me sterile water. Hot, if possible. Maybe we can dilute the saline before it does more damage." Jack grumbled, but went to do as he was told. "They say we don't know aliens exist, but we've got a word for alien biologists. Makes you think." Ethan didn't look up, still, focused on the wound. He let out a short, exasperated sigh. "Yeah, real deep, Jack. Next you'll be telling me we have a whole department for alien therapists, too." Jack smirked. "Could be. You never know." Ethan muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, "Don't jinx it." Tara, however, had stiffened at being left in the room alone with Ethan. Her yellow eyes darted between the two of them. Jack paused in the doorway. He pointed at himself. "Jack," then at Ethan. "Ethan." She hesitated, her expression hard to read. Then, finally, she muttered, "Eton." Jack raised an eyebrow. "There you go. Close enough." Ethan glanced up briefly, a mix of amusement and annoyance in his eyes. "Great. Now we've got names. I still need that water before she turns all Smurf-like." Jack chuckled softly and stepped back into the kitchen, muttering under his breath about how nothing ever went as planned. He grabbed a kettle, filled it with water, and set it to heat. He could hear Ethan's mutterings in the other room, carrying a mix of sarcasm and genuine concern. Jack set the kettle on the counter, the steam rising as it began to heat. "I'm lucky you picked up at all. I'm sure you had better things to do than help patch up an extraterrestrial." Ethan's voice softened. "You know I'll always have your back, even if you're dragging aliens into my life." Jack smirked as he grabbed a clean cloth and began prepping the sterile water. "Yeah, well, we're both in this mess now." Just as he was about to return to the other room, the kettle whistled and Jack paused for a moment. Jack smirked as he grabbed a clean cloth and began prepping the water. "All right," Jack said, returning to the room with the basin in hand. "Let's try this again." The blue blood had already started to turn slowly back to red, but there was still an odd, otherworldly glow to it. Maybe it was their imagination. Ethan shot him a glance. "It's not like we've got much of a choice." The night stretched on, and with it, Jack realized just how much his quiet life had already slipped away. replaced by something far more complicated and uncertain. The last few years in his ranch had been his escape, but now he was trapped between the past he thought he'd left behind and a future he couldn't begin to fathom. Now, start another Amsing story. It's a really old tradition, goes back a long ways. Started with keeping rats off of the old sailing ships. Nobody really knows who got the idea to start doing it again, Gordon explained, waving an explanatory hand around. Pretty soon, everyone had some kind of animal on board. I mean, transports don't really have much of a problem with rats. But it was like having a mascot for the ship. Like a pet, you know? A little entertainment to help pass the quiet days. He paused to lift the mug to his mouth, taking a deep gulp of the cool alcoholic beverage. Scott took the opportunity to lean in and interject. Aye, there were all sorts, though, not just cats. Parrots, dogs, even some ships with snakes and tarantulas. Though most didn't last long owing to the flippin' burn. Can you imagine a snake grabbing onto you in 0G? Or a hoofin' great big tarantula smacking you in the face when the drive fires back up? Ha! He smacked the metal table as he laughed. Gordon nodded, smiling as he carefully set his drink down. So of course, crews stuck to the animals that wouldn't crawl behind panels, or animals you could train, or at least restrain when you have to. Mostly cats and dogs. But once humanity encountered the other races, it didn't take long for that to change. He smiled at the pair of Baskins before him and raised his mug in a gesture of goodwill. The large, hairy aliens sitting opposite were mostly humanoid in appearance, save for a large amount of hair and a pair of tusks around the mouth. Baskins were generally quite burly and muscular, and they had a reputation for being less intelligent and clumsy. But Gordon found that most of the Baskins he met were surprisingly kind and gentle. It seemed their clumsy reputation probably came from the noise they made just moving around, likely owing to their hard feet and considerable weight. Gordon and Scott had encountered this particular pair a couple of times before. The Baskins both returned the gesture and made toothy grins. The shorter of the two, Gordon wasn't sure of its name, or even if he could pronounce it, grunted through his translator. Ha! As it did for us. Human stories and entertainments are something of an obsession for many of us now. Do tell us, how was the custom of carrying small animals for entertainment altered? Gordon wrinkled his nose at the translator's interpretation, but decided to press on. Well, I guess to understand it, you have to understand the human obsession with things that are cute. He waited for the translator, keen to ensure it didn't screw this point up. Scott knew well enough not to interject just yet, and took another gulp as he watched for their reaction. The larger Baskin nodded. A human gesture, Gordon noted, likely memorized and practiced for such social interactions. Yes, we understand the word, and have similar experiences with our own young, but do not experience it to the degree you do. Your media features this phenomena quite frequently, and I find it to be quite endearing. The smaller Baskin grunted in agreement, chuckling. Right, Gordon smiled. Well, there are some aliens that humans are naturally fond of, I suppose for evolutionary reasons. Ways that appeal aesthetically, or that we might find cute. He looked to Scott, who took his cue. Aye, the small ones and the furry ones mostly. It's not just the way they look, it's how they act as well. Scott watched as the Baskins followed his words through the translator. Gordon nodded. Ships would trade for unusual, exotic alien pets. Sometimes even sentient aliens from more compatible races were kept on as a ship's cat of sorts. Temporary crew, especially on long hauls. He paused again. Compatible? The smaller Baskin inquired, after taking a gulp of his own beverage. Sexually, for mating, but not procreation. The larger one spoke to his colleague. The translator clicked rapidly. Prostitution, or something similar. Perhaps companionship. Both. Comfort. Ah, I see. Analogous to a ship's cat, a creature of comfort. Clever. The Baskins were chuckling. Before the words finished coming out of the translator, Gordon mentally thanked the translator before continuing. Which brings us to your question. The new crew member you saw unloading with us yesterday was Katie. Katie? The larger Baskin chuckled again. Catty, ship's cat. He laughed loudly, slapping his stout belly as his feet rumbled against the deck plates, drawing a few glances. Mary Baskins can be clumsy enough to cause damage after all. His partner held his hands up at his shoulders, the equivalent of a Baskin apology, prompting his friend to settle down. The large Baskin recovered, taking another gulp before continuing the conversation, his drink almost done. I see. Not an unusually shaped human after all. I thought not. Must be from the fallen. Race instead, yes? They are about that size and can change shape a little. Rare in this space, though. We find them... The translator clicked furiously, negotiating for an appropriate word. Difficult to understand, socially, but friendly, kind, peaceful. Reliable allies. Gordon and Scott both nodded. That wasn't hard to understand. Baskins had very strong social bonds, but those bonds were limited to family. They wouldn't think twice about discarding someone they'd worked with for a lifetime, unless there was shared blood. Not that this was a common occurrence. They were very easy to get along with and amicable, and their social interactions weren't dissimilar to humans. Social drinking, eating, etc. A Baskin usually wouldn't bother remembering your name, however. Fallens, on the other hand, would rarely. Forget it. It wasn't difficult to imagine a Fallen being offended by a Baskin's apparent disinterest. The large Baskin paused again and finished his drink. Sensing their interaction was almost at an end, Scott and Gordon made to do the same. Cat seems wrong. If my understanding of human Earth is correct, wouldn't Fox be more appropriate? He smiled another toothy grin and raised his eyebrows. Scott choked on his drink, coughing with laughter. Gordon smiled bitterly and nodded in agreement. Got me there. His face froze as his eyes drifted over to the bar's entrance, and he firmly nudged Scott in the rib with his elbow to get his attention. Scott followed his gaze, and his eyes widened in alarm. The bar, previously buzzing with noisy human and alien patrons, was noticeably quieter. Aye, good one, lads. It's been our pleasure, as usual. Safe journey. They made to stand as the Baskins did. The smaller one paused as he stood, noticing the change. He turned lumberingly to where Scott was staring, aware of the silence that had fallen around them. At the entrance to the bar stood a young girl. Most alien observers would state with a varying degrees of confidence that she was a young adult human. Humans would disagree, pointing to the obvious additional ears as signs that she was not. Most aliens still wouldn't be convinced. An extra set of ears, or an additional limb, wasn't that out of place among most alien races, considering mutations, ancestry, adaptation, genetic and cybernetic modifications, etc., and the sheer age of interstellar travel for most races that allowed such genetic divergence to take place. It was a simple fact that most were accustomed to. Any human would know immediately. It wasn't the small auburn fox ears on her head, or the unnatural amber-colored eyes. It was simply that no human would be that impeccably pretty. Everyone had imperfections, no matter how slight. No amount of digital altering, enhancing, or advertising tricks would produce a result like what was standing in the wide archway. It was simply unnatural, not artificial, just somehow perfect to the point of being impossible. Perhaps most importantly, nobody in their right mind would let a human girl that looked like that walk around a trading station wearing nothing but an oversized plain white t-shirt that barely covered her butt. As she scanned across the silent bar with deep concentration, she spotted Gordon and Scott. She immediately brightened into a dazzling smile and raised herself up on her tiptoes, lifting one arm high to wave at them. As she did, the t-shirt rose on one side. Blue panties today, eh? Scott sighed in resignation, waving back. At least she put some on this time, Gordon commented as he made off to get her. Melanie was standing on the rear ramp as the trio rounded the corner to the dock. She smirked as she saw Gordon's defeated face in the distance, contrasted against Scott's broad grin. Katie was plodding happily between them, cheerfully pointing out the view of the nearby star through the high ceiling. The noisy dock could accommodate 8 small ships, and theirs was halfway down, with a good couple 100 meters between their berth and the corridor to the station interior. She shook her head again. You don't think you're treating her like a child? Poor girl probably just wanted a little freedom. I'm pretty sure she can take care of herself, for the most part at least, she said quietly. As I've told you before, duty of care means I can't knowingly leave you, or her, or any other crew member in a situation that might endanger or harm them. Luke replied, concentrating on the manifest on his pad. She scoffed. I wouldn't call wandering. Half naked into a bar of drunk, horny men dangerous. That's a Friday. You boys can be a little overprotective. She folded her arms, leaning against the one of the ramp arms as she watched the trio walk slowly towards the ship. You wouldn't remember their names the next day. She'd be able to remember the key parts of the entire drunken encounter long enough to recount them to their adult children, if she ever met them. All the important things they did, they said. What they enjoyed. Luke continued tapping at his pad. A quick movie reel of one-night stands replayed in Melanie's head, and she wrinkled her nose. Oh boy, okay. Yep, nope. Uh-huh. I'd rather forget some of those. Luke nodded and paused for a moment, turning to her. Yep. We can forget or choose not to remember. We can keep people at a distance. That's normal for us, but not for her. Getting close to people is in her nature. An extended family of criminals and other unsavory characters if she's not careful. She tilted her head, thinking. I'm not sure it works quite that way. Also, she should know that by now, yes. Like she should know that wandering half-naked around trading stations, alone and unarmed, without telling anyone where she was, is downright reckless. That's probably how she ended up in an animal crate. She felt a lump forming in her throat. It had been 3 stops prior. Gordon had found Katie stashed away at the back of small exotic animal trader, probably deliberately. Miscategorized as a pet, slavery was illegal in most parts of the galaxy, but slavers still preyed on the lesser-known races and palmed them off onto ignorant or unscrupulous traders in quieter corners. Some of the rarer races were particularly susceptible and sought after, fallen among them. Their ability to change parts of their appearance and shape made them hard for the inexperienced to identify. It was difficult to police, so most instances were dealt with through retrospective fines and license suspensions. The sorry state she'd been in would be difficult to forget. You don't know that, and you're still being overprotective, she said quietly. I can guess, he sighed. Look, I offered to keep her on until she found her way, and I'm already starting to regret it. Bottom line is, I don't know her well enough to trust her judgment, not as much as I trust the rest of you. They stopped as the trio rounded the bottom of the rear ramp. All good, Cap? Gordon asked, noticing the tension. Scott looked quizzically at Melanie, who gave a small nod. Luke thinks I'm reckless and doesn't trust me, Katie announced bluntly, smiling bitterly as she walked up the ramp. Luke and Melanie both stood in slightly stunned silence, while Gordon and Scott looked at each other, she pointing to the ears atop her head as she breezed past Luke. Not just for show, she said before entering the ship. Ouch, Scott murmured. Gordon nudged him again. His elbow was getting sore. Seemed to be happening a lot lately, he mused. Okay, so, like we've said before, until everyone gets adjusted, just let someone know where you're going, okay? Or just, if you're not going to be on board or want to head off for some time alone, just let someone know what you're doing. We can give you a wristcom and set the ship to auto-monitor and alert us if you get into trouble. Melanie hated this. She stood nervously just inside the doorway of Katie's cabin. She was not a role model for procedures by any stretch. Gordon or even Scott would be much better placed for this conversation. I feel adjusted. Except for these clothes. Katie fidgeted on her bunk, tugging frustratedly at the collar of her oversized t-shirt. She was sulking. I can see that. Melanie sighed. Look, we haven't really talked since you came on board, right? You spent a long time recovering, and most of our conversations since then have been about the ship, food, or other superficial stuff. I don't know if you've talked much with anyone else. Katie shook her head. Right. Melanie nodded. She slapped her thighs dramatically and plonked herself down next to Katie on her bunk. Okay then, what do you want to know? She pondered for a moment, still idly tugging at her t-shirt. Why do you insist on these enormous clothes at day and at night and on stations and underneath and all the time? We only wear them to protect from hazards. They clearly aren't decorative. Melanie decided to tactfully avoid addressing the insult to Scott's t-shirts. Yeah, a lot of races, especially those with hair or fur, don't really bother with full-body coverings like we do. But most humans don't have a lot of fur. Scott does. Scott barely qualifies as human. Most of us don't have much hair or fur, so we cover ourselves to keep warm. Why not just make the environment warmer? Well, it's not just for heat. There's an element of protection to it as well. Our planet has varying weather like snow, rain, sunshine, ultraviolet radiation, and wind. And there's protection from the environment, like When moving around, clothes will protect you from cuts and scratches. Katie nodded. Human skin is sensitive. She gently touched Melanie's wrist to emphasize her point. But not that fragile. True. But we cover parts of our bodies for modesty as well. That's common among some other races too, with or without fur. We don't display our sex organs, for example. We cover them unless we're mating or maybe looking to mate. Like, going out? She emphasized, raising her eyebrows, referring to the outfit Melanie had worn on her last night ashore. Exactly. Some of us, mostly the women, females, but the males too, wear a little less or choose different clothing to show off parts of our bodies, like advertising, proudly displaying our best genetics or something. There was a brief silence while Katie chewed over the words in her head. You determine compatibility and signal openness to mating through a lack of clothing, which you accomplish by wearing lots of clothing the rest of the time. She wrinkled her nose. That's objectively silly, Melanie chuckled. Well, that's not all of it, but as far as clothes are concerned, yes. That's also why we've given you some to wear. So there aren't any misunderstandings if and when you go ashore. Like 85, maybe 90% of places we visit recommend coverings of some kind, and some have laws governing public nudity. We can find you other clothes, though. Katie had already declined her offers to donate some pants or leg prisons. She picked up a pair of socks and examined them with some concern. Misunderstandings. Advertising an openness to mating, you mean? I see. But I will never get used to these. Melanie smiled and gently took the socks away from her. Well, we'll see how you feel about those when you get cold. It's just... She paused to gesture to Katie's torso and thighs. The important bits, so you don't get any unwanted attention ashore, yeah? I certainly don't mind what you wear on board, and I don't think the boys really care either. It's very strange to cover up when uncovered is preferred. Human customs are contradictory. Katie sighed with frustration. But it's a small concession. I don't think a group of horny men would be dangerous, but I'll take it as a good sign that you all care for my well-being. She smiled warmly. Melanie nodded in agreement and thought for a moment. Can I ask, though, why not just change back to how you were before? When we found you, I mean. If that's easier for you. Since coming on board, she'd lost almost all the fur she'd had when they found her, among other subtle and no-so-subtle changes. Poor Gordon had misread the handover report and spent half a night shift searching for her tail before Katie clarified that it was a normal, if dramatic adjustment, not an accident. She shook her head. I can control it a little, but it's mostly instinct, from social bonds and past experiences. We adapt to our environment, to our... She searched for the word. Family? Group? Company? I don't think you have a word for it. But this will be my first time for less. It's not really as uncomfortable as it looked, she admitted, examining her knees. There was a brief silence as Melanie considered her explanation and swallowed nervously. Family, does that mean you want to stay? She tilted her head and looked into the distance. Sometimes my instincts decide before I do. The silence was longer this time, and Melanie joined her in staring into the distance, thinking back to Luke's comment about how she ended up in an animal crate. She momentarily considered asking about it before quickly dismissing the notion. Another time, perhaps. It wasn't recklessness, Katie said, watching her face. The comment had clearly been bothering her, Melanie stuttered. I didn't. It was betrayal, exchanged for safe passage. Pirates. Melanie winced at the blunt explanation. It wasn't unheard of. Ships always had something of value worth taking, but to give up a crew member was low. No crew worth their salt. Would fly with a captain willing to exchange another life for their own. To be given away by a crew that she would have considered a close family must have been incredibly painful. I'm so sorry, Katie. I can't even imagine. If it's any comfort, we would never... You might. We would not. Ever. Not to crew. Not to family. None of us would choose that. Not on our worst day. Katie tilted her head, saying nothing, just looking at her. She wasn't very good at this type of thing, so Melanie did the only thing she could think of, and just hugged her. Scott sat in the cockpit, running the first round of pre-flight checks. His eyes flickered over to the seat next to his. "You're broodin', Cap," Luke tutted. "How many times—" "I don't brood." "Thinking." "I'm thinking, Will," Scott chuckled. "Aye, but you don't call me William when you're thinking, do ya?" He grinned, looking over for a reaction. "I always thought you should have been an engineer. Would have fit you better. I should see if Gordon wants to swap. I bet station traffic wouldn't have to ask him to repeat himself all the damn time. Ha! Judging by his last attempt, I reckon the fines would put you out of business. But point taken." Scott smiled, motioning to zip his lips. His smile slowly turned to an expression of curiosity as he tapped his way through the readouts. "We're a touch over. 30 kilos. Luke, or so? Anybody been shopping?" Luke didn't have to double-check his numbers. Scott wouldn't make an error like that. He tapped his comm. "Gordon, any last-minute parts or supplies? We're a touch overweight." Gordon's voice came back crisp and clear. "Wouldn't dream of it, Cap. Turnaround gave us exactly what we asked for, not a drop more, as usual. Everything else was logged. How much? 30. Nah, nothing like that. No tools, parts, or fluids outside of logged. Picked up a couple of personal items on station, but no more than a couple kilos at best. Mostly snacks. All stowed. It was Luke's. Turned to frown. It wasn't a large mass. Probably not big enough for a stowaway, but bigger than a weekend shopping trip, and big enough to be a concern. An unsecured 30 kilos could easily kill someone or punch a hole through something important. If it was solid enough... He tapped the comm again. "Mel, we're about 30 over. You or Katie get anything that might account for that?" Her voice came back tinny and echoing. "Cargo bay." "Maybe a few kilos of clothes for Kat, so Scott can get his precious t-shirts back. We're just checking everything now, and it's exactly what we loaded. Doesn't look like anything's been tampered with." Scott had finished the rest of the pre-flight checks. "What'll it be, Cap?" They didn't have time for this. "We'll do a quick sweep and then a shake-off if we don't find anything. 10 minutes. Let port know." He tapped crew-wide comms. "Shake off in 10 minutes. We'll do a sweep first." He listened to Scott talking and looked out into the port. Their ship, the Eventide, was bigger than a cargo shuttle but not nearly as massive as a freighter. Perfect for quick transport of small, expensive equipment, but a complete search of a ship like this would take hours. A little hop off the pad and a pitch, roll and yaw test was a quick and practical way to check for uneven loads. Anything unsecured would probably come loose and make a little noise without causing much damage, and once they figured out where it was, they could identify and secure it. Experienced pilots could even tell where the extra weight was based on. The change in flight dynamics, and Scott had logged more than enough time at the helm to tell. Unless it was perfectly at the center of mass, he'd know where to start. "Katie," he tapped his comm again, "sweep your cabin and then join me outside. About time we get you used to the exterior, too." Crew would generally check their own cabins. First, to avoid any embarrassment and retain some privacy before moving on to the common and work areas. It avoided any accusations of snooping through someone else's cabin. After taking a minute to check his own cabin and finding nothing amiss, he found Katie at the bottom of the rear ramp. Wearing overalls, but barefoot, he noted. "Know what you're looking for?" he asked. "Anything out of the ordinary, I imagine? But I'm not quite sure what ordinary is for this ship," she responded as she eyed a questionable piece of patchwork on the hull. Crossing her arms with a frown, she watched him nod and swallow nervously. "Anything new, anything out of place, and anything hiding in nooks and crannies," he said, as he placed a hand on the small firearm attached to his waist. Her ears twitched for a moment, and she paused. "You won't need that," she smiled quietly, unfolding her arms as she moved towards one of the starboard landing legs. "Captain," she said loudly, peering at the void where the leg retracted. "I have found a mighty warrior to aid in our quest against space pirates. I believe we can acquire his services for 2 Earth pancakes." Luke frowned in confusion. "Yes. You remembered?" trilled a small voice. Luke fastened his firearm back into its holster and pinched his nose. Katie nodded enthusiastically. "Who could forget the mighty Vral, savior of the weak, protector of less fortunate?" She opened her arms as if proclaiming to the heavens. A small Valori child leapt out of the void and into her arms. She made an audible oof as it landed. "Okay, but Vral's not my real name, you know. That's just my warrior name." Katie nodded. "I am aware." She smiled mischievously at him. "You're so heavy, even in this gravity." Maybe 20 kilos? Did you pack a bunch of supplies up there too? The small Valori looked at the silently fuming Luke. Am I in trouble? I brought snacks. In case I get hungry on the way to the pirates. Are snacks not allowed? Katie raised her eyebrows at Luke and answered before he started yelling. Snacks are allowed, but I'm afraid we have enough mighty warriors already for this trip. We have an enormous hairy gorilla that wears boring, scratchy, and uncomfortable clothes, a super strong ninja woman, and even a super smart genius man. Also him. She tilted her head to Luke. Our gorilla talks very strangely like, cancel the shake-off. Luke sighed into his comm to Gordon. We have a mini stowaway. Get Port to come pick him up. Roger, Cap, will do. Scott answered. There was a pause. Is she talking about me? It sounds like she's talking about me. No. He lied. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button. Give this video a big thumbs up and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.